This evening we have the star of If Beale Street Could Talk, Kiki Layne, and then writer-director Barry Jenkins. Keep it going, it's a long walkway. There we go. Yes, yes. A little bit about why James Baldwin, why this book of all the books?
Yeah, I kind of fell in love with James Baldwin when I was an undergrad. Actually, an ex-girlfriend and breaking up with me, broke up with me and said, "You need to read James Baldwin." That was my introduction to James Baldwin. And then 10 years later, I hadn't read this book, If Beale Street Could Talk, but people knew at that point that I was a James Baldwin fan. And so a friend of mine named Julia Sherrar, who works in sound, she did all the sound for Ballast. She said, "Hey, have you read Beale Street?" And she assumed I hadn't because I never spoke about it. And she gave it to me and said that thing that people always say to filmmakers, "You should read this book. I think there's a movie in it." But she was right, because I read it and right away I just saw that it was the fusion of Mr. Baldwin's two voices. You know, the one voice that was so diligent about capturing sensuality, romance, you know, interpersonal relationships, but was just as passionate about systemic injustice and shining a spotlight on the ways in which society and the American judicial system disenfranchises the lives and souls of black folks in America. And I felt like those two voices were perfectly fused in this narrative, in the love between Tish and Bonnie. And I just knew I had to make it into a film. So much so, don't do this, I don't recommend it, but when I first adapted the book, I did not have the rights to it. I just wrote it and decided, but I figured it out afterwards.
That's called confidence in yourself. You knew what was going to happen.
It was not confidence. It was ignorance in a certain way, but yeah, here we are.
I love it though. Kiki, this is your first film role. And it's James Baldwin. I feel like that's a lot of pressure. Talk to us a little bit about just like, what was your initial reaction when you found out you booked the role?
You know, after calming down, after the tears and the screaming and, you know, calling my mama and everything, I don't know, it just, I knew that it was going to be something special, you know, Barry Jenkins and James Baldwin, and I definitely, you know, had those moments of, you know, instead of feeling the excitement of that, feeling the, oh my goodness, it's Barry Jenkins, and it's James Baldwin, and this is Follow to Moonlight, and Regina King, my mama. I definitely went through all of that. But you know what was beautiful about, you know, being a part of this project is that just how you see all of these characters, you know, coming around my character Tish in the film, that's how all of these people that I was working with came around me, Kiki, as I was experiencing all of these new things for the first time and, you know, learning so much for the first time. And so that really helped me to navigate those moments with that pressure and, you know, all of these different things that cannot serve my work, you know, would start, you know, weighing on my mind. And I mean, we created such a family on this set that I felt like people could actually see it. Like there were moments where like Barry could just see or Regina could just see like, Kiki's having one of those moments. Like she's thinking like, nope, come over here. Like, and, you know, talk me down from, you know, all of that mess that's just not gonna serve the work.
Barry, I've asked you before. Talk to us a little bit about piecing the family together. Regina, Coleman, Stefan, Kiki, Tiana, Anjanou, everybody else.
Yeah, it was, you know, the first mission was to find Tish and Bonnie. You know, I think when you read the book, what's very clear is that these two characters are soulmates. And I just hadn't seen many depictions of young black people depicted as soulmates with this very, just like innocent, pure, lush kind of love. So we started there. I frame it that way because we didn't do any chemistry reads on Moonlight, but we had to do chemistry reads for this film. So we got Kiki and Stefan together, and right away it was clear they understood that concept of soulmates and they had chemistry. And then from there we wanted the chemistry to radiate outwards. We tried to build families around Kiki and a family around Stefan. And as Kiki said, once I contacted Regina and it seemed like Regina was interested, that was kind of like the building block, you know. Where I grew up, you know, the family usually starts with a black woman. And so once we found our matriarch, it was just about, again, building these worlds around Kiki and then a world around Regina and on both sides of the relationship. And then from there, It was just about trying to find a group of actors. I wanted it to be a very faithful adaptation who could take the words of Baldwin and allow them to remain set in the period that they were written, and yet somehow bring an almost contemporary ear to them. And I think when you're working with people who are as diligent and trained and just fantastic as Coleman Domingo, like Coleman could take a can of Campbell's soup and like read the ingredients of that shit, and you would be like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful thing I've heard all my life. And so it was about trying to find actors who could do that, surrounding Kiki and Stefan.
I want to talk about what we coined back at Toronto as the blackest scene in cinema, and that's the family scene earlier on. And I want to direct this at you, Kiki. It plays very comedic in rooms. I don't know how to play tonight, but it plays very comedic in rooms, but it's actually very serious. Talk to me about being in that scene and the feelings and the emotions and the arc that happens in that scene alone.
I mean, it's so much. It's really a very important, scene for Tish, because it's really where we start to see her finding her voice, and more so, I think, actually finding that she has to fight for her family, for this child that she is about to bring into the world, and then also having it, thrown in her face after receiving all of the support, thankfully that she did from her family, but seeing that it's not going to always be supported. The situation that she is in, her bringing in this child, even, her fighting to get her man out of prison. Like, it's not always going to be a supportive environment, and she can't crumble under that. She has something now, greater to fight for. And so I don't know, it's just interesting. That scene has so many different colors in it. There is, the comedy, but there is still all of this pain and also this disappointment too, that was their reaction. But it's definitely a moment where you see Tish growing, but then you also see, how much further she has to go, because there is that moment where Ernestine has to step in. It's like Tish is standing up, but she's not quite there yet to, really shut shit down the way that Ernestine is going to do it. And so I think it's a really, powerful scene in that way of showing, like, she's headed somewhere. There's, she's reaching this new level, but we know she still has so much more to go.
My favorite entire movie is when Tiana Paris's character says to you, unbow your head.
Yeah, it speaks to, there's no shame. There can't be any shame in a household that's supposed to be filled with unconditional love. And it's, so important, because what Tish is experiencing for so many young women has, in some way brought shame to them, or is spoken of as something that's brought shame to their families. And so I think that line is so important, because it is, letting Tish know, like, no, there's no room for that. Like, we are loving you in this, we're gonna love you through this, and that's how we are gonna get on the other side of this thing. And you have nothing to hang your head about, because her family recognizes that where she is at is a result of nothing but love.
Now, Barry, you love putting the camera all up in their faces. Talk to us about the utility of that. Like, why and why do you do that?
I don't do it a lot, but I like the utility of doing it. I think, especially with this film, because it's an adaptation of a literary work, and literature is such an amazing vehicle for the interior voice. But cinema is not the best vehicle for an interior voice. What I mean by that is when you read a book, everything in your brain is activated. Somebody says something, you hear it in your head. Somebody smells something, you hear it in your head. The author goes off on an intellectual tangent, and you're hearing those words in your head. So everything is activated. Sitting in a movie theater is a very passive experience. The screen is here, you guys are there. Away from it, you have popcorn, your cell phone might still be on. I hope it wasn't, but it might have been. It's a very passive experience. And I think this idea of the direct-to-camera, to me, I'm trying to consider the movie theater like the brain itself. And so almost like you guys are reading a book and now you're inside the book. So the screen is here, the speakers are all around, and yet still the camera is very rarely in the actors' faces. You're always sort of like a voyeur outside them. But every now and then, if I'm on set and I see that the actor and the character have fused in a certain way, it's why these direct-to-camera moments very rarely have dialogue. Then I want to place the camera directly in front of the actor. Kiki describes acting as giving and receiving, and when you're looking directly into a camera, you're only giving. But now you guys in the auditorium are directly receiving. And I believe in my heart that because you guys are here out of goodwill, that when you receive Kiki's image or Stefan's image or Regina's image looking directly at you, you then are giving something either to your neighbor, to the film, somewhere. But it's like the empathy is now activated, it's not passive. And so occasionally, if it's at the bottom of a really intense scene, or it could be intense, very big dramatic emotions. You know, the first act is a kitchen sink drama, the second act is not a kitchen sink drama. But sometimes I want to place the actor, I want to place the camera directly in front of them so we can have you guys access directly their emotions. Case in point, there is an assault. It's basically the engine of this film. This woman is assaulted. And it was very adamant, I think, for Mr. Baldwin and for me in this adaptation that she is not the antagonist. You know, she has suffered trauma. And so after we had filmed the scene with her, Emily Rios and Regina King in the Dominican Republic, again, the actors don't know when we're going to do these direct-to-camera shots. I don't know it either. If I see the actors there, then we kind of spring it on them. And thankfully, through goodwill, the actors are always willing to go down that path. But I said to Emily, after this super intense scene, I said, would you mind looking directly into my camera? I want to go up to the hilltop, and I want the audience to see directly, to directly access the emotions you're feeling. Because I think there's going to be a moment when I'm going to want them to look directly at you so they know they have to deal with your trauma. And so I think as a tool, like you said, utility, the utility in it is that you guys cannot come in here and walk them out in my character's shoes and not literally step into their shoes. And so occasionally we will place the camera directly where the fourth wall says we shouldn't. But I think it does engender a direct relationship between the audience and the characters, so that's what we do.
And you decided to, in the adaptation, a lot of the dialogue is directly from the book. Well, talk to us about that choice. Why not, update it?
Yeah, I mean, one, I think James Baldwin is brilliant. You know, I'm a guy who's cheating. Like, the last two films is a cheat code. Jarrell Alvin McCraney is a MacArthur genius. James Baldwin is a genius, period. So why the fuck would I step in and rewrite their dialogue? There's just like no reason for it. And it's also, too, this is the first big screen English language adaptation of James Baldwin, and I wanted the language to arrive to the audience intact. I didn't see a need, once we decided not to update the narrative from 1974 to 2013, we allowed the film to remain set in the period in which it was published. I feel like the language came part and parcel with that, and it was then incumbent upon the actors to take that language and without changing the words, sort of finesse the feeling in a certain way, so that for a contemporary audience, it didn't feel, it didn't clang in the ear.
Kiki, when
What? I don't know about that. Kiki be like, no, it's perfect. We got to do it exactly the way it's written. So now you get an answer, because I want you to tell the truth. I want you to tell the truth.
No, I mean, I was in the book so much that I think I don't know, I felt like this is how, these people, this is how they talk, this is how they were communicating, and it does work, and it was just, I don't know, up to me to find, I don't know, how to make it just seem more natural for myself. But yeah, I was here for the dialogue. It's
What's the line? That's a terrible thing you said to me. That's the most terrible thing I heard all my life.
That was
That's me imitating Kiki. Because I was like, I don't know if we can do that line. Kiki was like, no, I'm going to do it. I got it. Trust me. And she did.
Yeah.
That was the one I was like, I don't know about that one.
No, it was a couple of them that it's like, obviously, Kiki Layne in 2018 would say very differently, what that line is. But I knew, especially for Tish, because she does speak so little, like, the words that she does use are so important. And, I just trusted, I'm like, Baldwin wrote it that way for a reason. And I felt like, especially with Tish, like, it was so specific to who she is and how she moves through space and how she does communicate. So when she does find the words, if these are the words that she has found, there's a reason for that, and I just gotta figure out how to make it, seem natural.
The top of the film starts with a quote from James Baldwin from the book, and it basically says, right, that all black folks know like what Beale Street is. They were born on Beale Street, and that it's like, I think the last line is that it's up to the audience to discern like the meaning and the rhythm of Beale Street. I've always wanted to ask both of you, what do you think, what's that meaning in the rhythm for you two?
I think it's somehow through the chaos, through these discordant sounds, building families, finding love, building communities. I think the book, in a certain way, could be retitled "The Lives and Souls of Black Folks," because I do think that the struggle that Tish and Fonnie undergo through no cause of their own, yet you end up at the end of the story. We have a sequence where you have these two Black fathers who are committing crimes to bail out the son who's committed no crime, which is basically America in a nutshell. And yet somehow at the end of it all, you have a family sitting around the table, saying grace. So I think in a certain way, I think the meaning and the beating of the drums is we have to keep these families together. It's quote Spike, by any means necessary. To quote Malcolm X, by any means necessary.
Yeah. Hey. All right, sorry, I feel like her mic cut out. But no, I mean, I think, this Beale streets are the places where, like, you find Black people surviving and loving against, all the unfair, injustices and, issues that we face on a daily basis. And so I feel like that rhythm is that love, that thing that is keeping us surviving, that joy that even, regardless of the circumstances, we are still able to laugh. We are still able to, have these beautiful, beautiful moments filled with joy and love. And so I think, it speaks to that strength that we still carry and have always had against whatever hello. Facing this mic is not supporting my life.
How you said that the thrust of this story is that character's assault. And you've spoken a lot about the sensitivity that Baldwin did with that particular storyline, like in the scene with Tish and Ernestine. And when they're talking about whether or not they feel Emily Rios' character has actually been assaulted, they say, yes, we feel like she has, but we know it wasn't him. Talk to me about adhering to that sensitivity and ensuring that didn't get lost.
Yeah, it was interesting. There was almost a will to want to go to the end of the earth to really clarify what that is. I think a lot of it comes down to language. I think it's important to remember this story has its root in literature, which is language. It takes 20 hours to read the book. It takes 2 hours to watch the film. So there's so much more, literally, so many more words that are used to express the same things that we're expressing in sounds and images in this film. And yet, Mr. Baldwin was incredibly sensitive to the issue of the sexual assault that occurs in the story, and creating this film where you see all these women orbiting this character played so wonderfully by Emily Rios. I felt like it was extra sensitive, that the other characters needed to be extra sensitive in how they spoke about her. Now, we didn't change the language of the book. Everything that Regina and Tiana, all those characters, Tish, that they say about Ms. Rios, or Ms. Rogers, is taken from the book. But the work I had to do was to really unpack what the hell is actually happening here. And when I really drilled down to it, what I understood was, the character played by Emily Rios, Victoria Rogers, is Puerto Rican. How close to the American dream can you get and not have full access to it than being Puerto Rican? We filmed this literally, I think, 2 weeks after the hurricane hit, and so we ended up going to the Dominican Republic. And so I'm filming the sequence with this woman who's been assaulted, and the president is in Puerto Rico, shooting jumpers with paper towels. And I'm like, yeah, okay, Baldwin knew exactly what the hell he was doing. I say that because in this film, Fonnie is not falsely accused of anything. He's chosen out of a police lineup. He's placed in a police lineup by a police officer who very clearly is a racist. And we see the moment when that police officer decides, I'm going to get you. Now, what does that mean? The woman who's actually been assaulted is also being disenfranchised because he doesn't give a shit about who actually assaulted her. And so what we have is the system being so willfully manipulated that once these young men get up inside the system, nobody gives a damn how they got there. Now it's supply and demand. We have prisons we have built, and we have to have people who put them in, to fill them. And this officer has decided, I've got one who's going to fill it. And so for me, once we understood that, they're being sensitive to her assault because she is not the antagonist in this film, and Fonnie's not the antagonist either. These two characters are not diametrically opposed. Let's treat them all with empathy, with their full humanity. And it's why 30 minutes into the film, you guys look directly at this person, directly at this character to show her trauma is very, very real. We're going to acknowledge it, and every character in the film is going to acknowledge it. So much so that when Regina King goes down to Puerto Rico to speak to this woman, she has to acknowledge it as well. And the explosion that results from that is not about this idea of Bonnie's going to go to prison or anything like that. It's that everyone is just hurting, and there is no solution for any of their traumas.
And speaking of
like this, and now we're cutting between this energy. But on set, Stefan is literally passing his energy to Brian. Brian's taking it, transforming it, and passing it back to Stefan. So we kick one camera off the set, and we put the camera on the slider. And I just said we want to follow the energy. And so as we're following this energy, and now that this trauma is coming to the surface, it's crystallizing, everything else is swirling. Miles Davis Blue and Green is playing, but in this auditorium, now you guys are in the book. I want to activate everything. It starts to swirl around the room. And we're shooting on the Alexa 65, which is a very detailed format. We can bring the focus to within like a whisper, a whisker on Brian's chin. And so as the scene drifts, this rumble comes into the room, the same song that plays when Tish and Fonnie first make love, that really beautiful track called Eros. And this iteration, this scene is called PTSD. The same melody, but now this thing is a symbol of life and birth, has been corrupted by the system, by this trauma that theoretically is buried, but is now coming back to the surface. And so now it's been mutated into this source of dread, despair, and honestly death. And so that sequence to me was about Stefan and Brian walking in full of life, but in telling these stories about what the system can do to you. I can't even drive a car, Fonnie, Brian says. But he spent 2.5 years in prison for stealing a car. And so now this trauma comes back to the surface. And I tip my hat to those guys. We shot it in one day. It was Brian's only day. On set, he came up from Atlanta, filming Atlanta, Paperboy. But he's not Paperboy in that scene. It was just really beautiful working with those guys.
My last question for both of you is about the final scene of the film. It kind of, for me, it services as a message of hope, perhaps, some lightness in this story that could feel very dark. What do y'all hope that the audiences are taking away from that scene in particular?
Can I see a show of hands of who's read the novel that the film is based on? Because the ending of the film is a little bit different than the ending of the novel. You guys have already seen the film, so I'm going to spoil the ending of the novel, unfortunately. But there's a lot of death in the ending of the novel. I'll just put it that way. And we filmed all that death. It's a very faithful adaptation. But you watch a film, and the film takes on a life of its own. I think for me, having to step out of the shadow of James Baldwin and become the author of the film, the ending was the most important part of that. It's LA, so you guys probably watched the credits. It goes New York unit, Dominican Republic unit, then LA unit? Why is it LA unit? Because the ending was extended. And so for me, I just felt like telling the story, we were sitting here having a discussion about love and family and community. I just didn't want to kill a black patriarch at the end of this film. And Stefan's performance in the last prison scene is so powerful that people assumed he went back and committed suicide. And then in the novel, there's another suicide that takes place. And I just felt like, having gone through this journey of these 2 hours, the family was intact. So I wanted to confirm that the child was born safe and well, as Regina says, and is healthy, and that the love between these 2 characters is still intact. And so I do think it's a very grounded depiction of reality. This kid, Khalif Browder, was arrested for stealing a backpack, air quotes, spent 3 years on Rikers Island, 2.5 in solitary confinement, did not steal the backpack, of course, but the trauma was so deeply ingrained that he committed suicide when he got out. This is 5 years ago. So in 1974, there's no way in my mind Fonnie was not going to do time. And yet I wanted to show, even during that time, the family is still intact. His last promise is, I'm going to build us a great big table, and our family's going to eat off it for a long, long time to come. Not the table he built, but it's big as hell, and the family is still eating. And I wanted to plant a flag and confirm the family is still eating, they're still healthy, and there's still love. That's why we ended the film the way we did.
Thank you both so much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.